Hello, everyone. Greg Nibbler here with Fox 12 Now, part of Fox 12 Oregon. We're broadcasting live, and thanks for joining us. Today, right now, we are talking about a big announcement that the city of Portland had today regarding a special section of downtown that is going to be going to zero emissions. So what does that mean? How does it all work? We're going to get into that here, and we're going to answer some questions. We're going to ask some questions, and to do so, we're joined now by Dylan Rivera from Portland Bureau of Transportation. And Dylan, thanks so much for being here with us. I think, just to kind of start off for anybody who's unaware of what's going to happen today, can you give us the backstory of what really is going on here with this special zone?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Today we welcome some special guests from the United States Department of Transportation to talk about a SMART grant that's going to give PBOT $2 million to do a demonstration project to see how we can move freight in a part of the downtown area with zero emissions, zero pollution, zero carbon emissions, and electric vehicles and bike-powered vehicles that can really improve safety, reduce pollution, and reduce carbon emissions. And so it's a really exciting program, and no one's done anything quite like this anywhere in the nation.
So yeah, this is the first place, as you just mentioned right there, the first place in the nation that this has been tested out.
Yeah, so LA and Santa Monica have done some incentive-based programs where it's just sort of optional, put a sign up saying, hey, park an electric vehicle here, but with no real data gathering or enforcement or kind of rules around it. And so Rotterdam in Europe is a major port, one of the world's biggest, and they've been piloting some actions to put rules around zero emission vehicles and to incentivize that. And so what we're going to try to do is the idea of our pilot here is to have 3 loading zones that are at 3 crucial buildings in downtown Portland. So the Portland Building, the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt Federal Building, and the new Multnomah County Courthouse. And so at those 3 loading zones, the idea is we would only allow loading and unloading with zero emission vehicles. So that means it could be an all-electric delivery truck, one of those step-through trucks where the driver has a full door open and they're standing up and they just hop out, make the delivery, come back in, sometimes called a box truck. The other option would be a hydrogen fuel-based zero-emission vehicle. And then the third option we think is likely is electric assist cargo bikes. So Beeline is the leading company for this locally, and you might see their yellow logo all over the downtown area as their couriers are using bikes with electric assist to move freight deliveries throughout the downtown area. Now, we understand some shippers may not have all-electric zero-emission vehicles in their fleet so far. A good option for them is the incentives we're developing. The incentives will be for those shippers to take their trucks, could be diesel truck or gas-powered truck, and deliver to Beeline's hub in the Central East Side. Then they'd unload there, and Beeline would take that shipment into multiple small bike cargo bike deliveries across a Hawthorne Bridge into downtown. And then that Beeline electric assist bike would come to one of these 3 zero emission loading zones and make the last mile delivery. So this has been talked about for more than a decade here in Portland, among logistics and freight industry experts. How do we make freight more sustainable? How do we make it cleaner and greener? Reduce emissions, reduce carbon emissions, reduce pollution, improve safety. And so in a constrained environment like downtown, you don't have a lot of room. And so, the hundreds of trucks that are coming into downtown to make deliveries are adding to traffic in a tight urban space. Can we take some of those trucks off the roads and replace them with these electric assist cargo bikes that puts that freight in the bike lane and gets it out of the travel lane and frees up space for traffic and public transit and everyone? So it's a really exciting pilot program. The Biden administration included this in the bipartisan infrastructure law to allow cities to experiment with new creative ways to work with private industry to reduce carbon emissions, reduce pollution, and improve safety. And so we're really excited about what we're going to learn. And we think we're going to really create some partnerships with local businesses to learn how we can make cleaner, greener freight work for everyone.
So, looking at this, I guess going back to what you mentioned as far as what vehicles would be allowed in there. So you're saying it's cargo trucks that are gas powered and not one of the other options that you have there. They would not be allowed in. Can you define what exactly that constitutes? Would that be something that's a full-on freight truck with a trailer? Are we talking about moving trucks? Like, where is that kind of defined?
So the boundary in that map that you see is proposal. It could be different. That boundary is not really a hard boundary. Those are just the blocks that are served most conveniently by a few of those loading zones in that area. As you can see, just to the north of the shaded area, there are a bunch of other loading zones that people can use that are not proposed to be in the program. And so will those get more use if folks are limited on how they can use the loading zones in this shaded zone? We don't know. We'll see. But there are options for folks, and there's nothing's going to happen to you when you cross the line and enter these shaded blocks there. That's just a map that shows the area where we think it would be most convenient to serve with the loading zones that we've targeted for this program at the county courthouse, at the federal building, and at the Portland building.
So this zone itself is not completely set yet. That may change.
That may change, and nothing will change about the streets in those zones. So car traffic will move normally through those streets. Every car, every truck that moves through those streets and parks on the street can still park on the street. We're not changing on-street parking. We're not changing bike racks. We're not changing anything except really those three closest loading zones. The 40 feet of on-street parking space that's used currently as a loading zone would be exclusively for zero emission vehicles loading or unloading. So again, it could be an all electric truck. Daimler's making those trucks right now. We saw one this morning that's been made, and it's scheduled for delivery to ODOT. And so there are many companies that are buying these all electric trucks, and there are federal and state credits and incentives for companies to use these zero emission freight vehicles. And we are creating incentives for companies to use Beeline, the cargo bike company, to make those last mile deliveries.
So again, kind of going back to that idea of what kind of vehicles can go into the zone and can deliver. So I know it says truck loading. You mentioned, though, does that really constitute any kind of vehicle that's doing any unloading at all? Like say for an example, like Uber Eats or something that's or an Amazon delivery truck. Like those would be things that wouldn't be allowed within those zones. Is that correct?
So Uber Eats and DoorDash are not affected by this whatsoever. Okay. They often use on-street parking spaces for their deliveries, and they often, frankly, double park. So they're not affected by this whatsoever. Amazon would probably be affected by this. And so that they have been introducing some zero emission all electric vehicles. And so this would be an opportunity for them to use the convenience of these zero emission loading zones.
Going to another part of it, where you mentioned that there will be a spot on the east side where delivery companies can bring their goods and then have them taken into downtown via e-bike. How does the cost structure work on that, and who is paying for that extra step on that delivery process?
Well, we haven't figured that out yet. We're going to work with the industry to figure out what they need, what would be meaningful to them as an incentive to use this bike hub on the east side to unload there and have electric assist cargo bikes go the last mile for them into downtown. We think there's a business case for this kind of shipping to happen. We think the federal government, the county, and the city have heard loud and clear from the public that they want us to be a part of reducing carbon emissions. And transportation is the number one source of carbon emissions. And even more than you add residential real estate and commercial real estate together, transportation is responsible for more carbon emissions than all of real estate combined in Portland. And so we need to do all we can to reduce our carbon footprint. And that means looking at our supply chain, and the goods we purchase are causing carbon emissions to be emitted just in the logistics of their delivery. And so how can we clean that up? How can we green our supply chain? We as a city are committed to reducing our carbon footprint. We've been leaders on that. The city of Portland was the first city in the United States to set a goal for reduction of carbon emissions back in the early 90s when no one else was doing that. Now it's quite common. And so the public wants us to take creative, significant action. And we think a demonstration project like this will show the public here in Portland and show other cities and show the federal government what's possible.
Do you have any kind of an estimation on what you think the actual carbon reduction will be?
We're not sure. You know, this is really cutting edge activity here. The SMART grant program is for revolutionizing transportation. So we're not sure what the carbon reduction will be. With this level of innovation, it's hard to estimate. One thing we're going to try to do to quantify that and to really evaluate the program is to try out some new sensors that can be mounted to utility poles or traffic signals, and they will count the vehicles that use these spaces. And they might be able to distinguish between a freight truck and a freight bicycle. And that would be helpful to know how many trucks are using it for loading and unloading, and how many bikes are using it for loading and unloading. And then the plan is we would have some level of warnings or enforcement with the standard PBOT parking enforcement staff who, enforce time limits on parking meters and that sort of thing already.
Yeah, that's a great segue actually to ask about that. Is how would this be enforced? If a gas-powered vehicle drives through there, a cargo truck goes through and makes a delivery there, what would the ramifications be, and how would that be enforced?
Yeah, so all vehicles can drive through the area as normal. That's not proposed to change whatsoever. The question is, who's using these loading zones at the back door of the Portland building, right there at the county courthouse, and right there at the federal building. And so we want those loading and unloading zones to be used by zero emission electric or other zero emission vehicles. And we think the private sector will respond hopefully to some reasonable rules of the road to set some boundaries on what qualifies as a zero emission vehicle, and how do we make sure that everyone is playing by the same rules. And so we find important in these environmental innovations and transitions to new technologies to give everyone a level playing field and set some rules that everyone can understand, so they know what the cost will be if they try to use these areas without complying, without using the zero emission vehicle in that zone.
And that cost hasn't been determined yet. Is that right?
No,
Okay.
no.
And what's the process for, I guess, getting this launched? You mentioned that the zone may change, so it sounds like the actual boundary of it isn't completely set in stone from what you were saying earlier. What's the timeline on instituting this zero emission delivery zone?
Yeah, so we're hoping to go live with this in the first quarter of 2024. So early next year, be able to launch this and get it started. And so between now and then, we'll have opportunities for some input, some discussion, and figuring out what are the right rules that the freight industry needs for these zones to make sense, and what are the right incentives that they need to try to make a change such as this to supply chains to make that work as well. So we've got some rules, we're going to have some smart incentives, and we're looking forward to working with delivery companies and with companies downtown that receive a lot of deliveries, that use cargo deliveries in downtown, to help meet their needs to have cleaner, greener freight for their businesses.
Well, Dylan, I want to thank you for joining me to talk about this too and explaining this out a little bit more. It sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces to this left, and just along those lines of getting the feedback you mentioned, that there's going to be some way for the public and for businesses to provide their feedback, provide their input. How is that going to happen? Will that be in the form of a public forum or discussion, or what's the way for that to occur?
Yeah, we'll see. We just got the approval for the funding, and so we'll need to strategize and work with the business community on what's an effective way to engage them and gather input from them, gather input from neighbors, gather input from those who are suffering from pollution from freight and other particulate matter in our air, and make sure we're making the right incentives and the right rules of the road for everyone.
Well, Dylan, thank you very much for joining us here. Appreciate your time. I'm sure you're very busy today with a lot of requests going on. So thanks for joining us here on Fox 12 Now and explaining what's going on with this.
You bet. Happy to help.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. All right, again, that was Dylan Rivera there from the Portland Bureau of Transportation talking about the Zero Emission Delivery Zone, and that's going to be coming into downtown. How that's going to happen, we just covered a lot of information right there, and they've got some more information on their website. All right, here's what's going to happen now. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back here in just a few minutes. I'm going to be joined by Nick Krupke. We're going to talk about the Blazers. We're going to talk about, well, there's a G League team that just got added in. You probably saw that news today, but also what's going to happen with Dame. Is Dame going to get traded? Is Dame going to demand a trade? Is Dame coming back? We're going to talk about that. We're going to speculate a little bit, so we want to hear what your speculation is too. What's going to happen with the draft? All of that. We're going to discuss that with Nick here. So whatever platform you're watching on, know that we'll be back here in just a few minutes, so stick around. We'll talk to you then with more